My name is Representative Keith Grover, and we're going to be talking about some of the problems that are presented with Senate Bill 71. I'll be giving a few comments, talking about Head Start in general, from a macro level. I have some philosophical underpinnings that drive me nuts about this type of legislation. And then Senator Dayton will talk a little bit more into the weeds with the bill itself. And then I'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the nuances. And then we'll be open for any questions. Head Start, most people are pretty aware of Head Start. It did originate approximately 40 years ago, and it was a remnant of the Great Society. And it's actually one of the remnants of the Great Society we are dealing with today. However, it rewards the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. Head Start is a perfect federal program, and I mean perfect. It's large, and it is getting larger. It's entrenched, it is very costly, and as data will show, it's ineffective. So when we talk about federal programs that are getting larger and larger, that are ineffective, that is the definition of what we see today happening more and more in the federal government. Our efforts today are to push back at this level at the state of Utah, where we have historically been very prudent fiscally and philosophically pushing against these type of oppressive and ineffective government programs. Head Start is encroaching further, ever more into the role of the family, the nuclear role of the family. And it further allows parents to simply relinquish their responsibilities in raising their own children. And Head Start is a poster child for all that is broken, and a perfect example of a government social engineering program. Senate Bill 71 is going to be discussed a little bit more in detail by Senator Dayton, and then I'll talk about some of these slides and give you some data to demonstrate why Head Start is not effective and why we should not continue to put more money and effort into failed programs. Senator Dayton.
Thank you. I appreciate working with my own representative, Keith Grover, who has his doctorate in education, and his voice is valued in this education discussion. Speaking of valued voices, I would just like to read quickly the list of groups that have joined with us in our concerns about this bill. We are backed by Citizens for Strong Families, Cornerstone of Freedom, Homemakers of America, Principled Liberty Foundation, Principles of Freedom Foundation, Standard of Liberty, Stop Agenda 21 Utah, the Leadership Foundation, Sisters of Liberty, the Thomas Jefferson Center, United Women's Forum, Utah Eagle Forum, Utah's Republic, Utah's Against Common Core, World Class Education Research, which is a project on Leadership Fund. Several groups that have concerns about what we're doing when we talk about expanding a program and putting into effect a plan to take 3- and 4-year-olds and put them into a public-private partnership. Now, I have a lot of concerns about public-private partnership, and I'm going to focus my efforts on that. We in the state of Utah have been, the legislature, I should say, has been very effective, dedicated and effective at increasing transparency for taxpayers. We have been committed to putting up websites to make sure that the taxpayers understand that the money we tax away from them can be followed online and they can see where that money is going. We have to be justifying our taxing money away from these hardworking families in the name of government services, and the government services have to be provided. Now, what we're talking about in Senate Bill 71 is a public-private partnership to create a preschool program. Private organizations are not subject to the same kind of accountability and transparency that public organizations are. We're going to lose some of the accountability and some of the ability to follow the money when we put together these public-private partnerships. And traditionally, when you watch those kinds of partnerships, you realize that the private part of the public-private partnership realizes that if they fail, the government still has to provide the services and the taxpayers will have to back them up. So it's, in my mind, a rather fragile partnership, no matter how well it's expressed, because we need to know that if we go into a partnership, if we're using taxpayers' money, that all the money involved can be tracked, can be followed, can be accounted for. There's also a concern about what's going to happen with the money that is generated from the private organizations if this plan in Senate Bill 71 fails. But as I read the bill and try to study this out, I can't find where the tracking is, where is the criteria for deciding where the failure is. I think that's a very important thing for us to understand, because we realize that in Utah Code we talk about providing public education for help for families in educating their children. It is not the other way around. The families are not here to help the education society. The education component of our society, which we generously fund, is there to help the families in educating their children. And it's a concern to me anytime we eliminate the opportunity for accountability, for tracking, for measurements and transparency. So those are some of the initial concerns that I have with Senate Bill 71, and I'm hoping that you would have the same concerns when you talk to your legislators.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of these slides, some of this data, and supporters of SB 71 are saying something like you might see on the slide, that it's high quality early childhood programs demonstrate significant return for every dollar invested. However, I'm assuming many of you have researched this or are familiar with Head Start. You will find that the studies do not show that to be true at all. There's an initial bump and then there's a fade. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that if you look at the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds there and the 5-year-olds, in 1965, you have the increase there through the 1990s, and you look at the 5-year-olds also, and then the returns are negligible. Next slide. And you'll see what I mean by returns are negligible, the amount of money that's been put in from 1970 doubling, and again some, through 2005, and even more now with the latest federal government allocation, shows in the next graph onto the right, you see the age 9, the age 13, the age 17, that the results are flat. And so the question has to be, you continue to put money towards something that is not working. And that's what is called fade out. And I'll just read this. This is with 4-year-old cohort. There was no strong evidence of impacts on children's language, literacy, or math measures at the end of kindergarten or at the end of first grade. And then the programs, some early childhood education programs, they weaken over time. And you can read that slide. And that's why I alluded to my first comments, is that I am convinced there is a different mission there for Head Start programs, and it's not necessarily academic. And it just weakens our children overall and weakens the their family. And then again, we have another slide that talks about diminished returns rate, 3rd grade. And this is by Roomberger. This is fairly recently. It says, achievement impact of preschool appears to diminish during the first 4 years of school. Preschool alone may have limited use as a long-term strategy for improving the achievement gap. And so I think we need to stop now and be honest with ourselves, say, what is it that the students need and when do they need it? If the data over 40 years is demonstrating that the achievement is not as was promised, and if achievement is not what we expect it to be, why do we keep putting money down into a program that is not effective? And that is pretty basic logic, and that's where my arguments are based. And we need to look at different measures. And you say, well, what could we do? There's lots of things we do on the local level. I can find lots of places for money at the local level that local schools and local entities are able to decide what's best for their kids and for their communities, versus a federal program that is inherently going to be inefficient because they're trying to prescribe general education goals to a very specific population. And as you know, we're all different even across the state of Utah. So those are my comments, and we're open for any type of questions you may have, if any. We were very convincing, is that what I understand?
I wanted to add one more thing. I hope that neither of us are misunderstood in thinking that we can tell families what they need to do for their children. We feel like people should have choices and options, and there are choices and options right now available in the marketplace. There are privately owned and funded preschools, there are co-op schools, there are already choices out there. I don't understand a need to then pull in government funding with a government public-private partnership to create a new preschool program that is supposedly optional. And we all know what happens to optional programs. Kindergarten was supposedly optional. It supposedly still is. But if people want to put their children in preschool, there are plenty of options, even for online. They can do preschool online. They can take them to other places, but we don't need to create a whole new program that's a public-private partnership with the concerns there are with funding that kind of issue. And I hope each of you who are interested could pick up a press packet. We appreciate you being here. We know there's another press conference coming in, and since there aren't questions, please just know that we are appreciative of any support that you can help us in expressing concerns on this program.
Representative Grover, can I ask you
Yes.
a quick question? As I understand it, SB 71 is targeted at people at the achievement gap, right? It's preschool children who are in a lower performing demographic. Is that, have you seen studies that specifically address that cohort, or are you basing these on sort of?
Yeah, in two parts. Well, as I read the bill, my understanding is that this bill would make Head Start still available to all and still is not prescriptive to a certain population. And yes, there is data that demonstrates that that is still not effective. Perhaps more effective would be for students in certain demographics or language difficult or that have language deficiencies, is to focus on the language acquisition rather than a Head Start program that, if you look at some of the curriculum, look what has been done in the past and is being done now, is somewhat more focused on ancillary issues but not academics, such as societal type of programming and things like that. We look at what the messages they're trying to do at the Head Start. Senator Dayton may want to comment as well.
I wanted to add one thing to that, Robert, too. In this bill, it specifically provides for funding on a sliding scale. It's an extension of No Child Left Behind, and I think you know my history of having some serious angst with No Child Left Behind. The way this bill is written, it allows for an LEA to charge a sliding scale fee to a student participating in so-called high-quality preschool programs, which means it's open to everybody. It might be targeted, but it's not limited. It's open to everyone.
There's not a cap on, I mean, in the bill, it's not written that there's a cap on the income level either, as I read it, so it.
Correct. Correct.
Go ahead, right here.
Yeah, I know in my own community, in my own district, we already offer preschool programs through the government. So to me, isn't this just another expansion of that?
Well, if you already offer preschool programs in your local community, it's probably not quite what Head Start would want you to do. Okay?
So this is through Head Start.
That's the way I kind of view it. Yeah, there are programs. My argument would be, let's empower the local programs that are already in place, that parents know the very best about what they need in their community, rather than to have this put upon us. A little flippant, but I think you got the point. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Just a comment. I just recently read a federal government report on early Head Start programs, and it said in there that specifically for the highest risk children, which I believe is what the original target of SB 71 was, that on every level there were 6 indicators, and every single one of them, the kids in the preschool program, fared more poorly than those in the control group, and that there was no obvious outcomes that was beneficial on the family level either. That the aids were given for the moderate and low risk children and not the high risk children, which was kind of interesting. So I'd be happy to pass that along to you.
Thank you. And that's the information I was alluding to. Those studies are not, there's lots of them, and they're very prevalent. And it's not something that's hard to find. Yes?
And I just say I appreciate those comments from Wendy Hart from the Alpine School Board. Thank you.
Have there been any studies showing any ill effects, like the comparison between children not going to preschool and being home and encouraging that rather than encouraging them to go to preschool, on the psychological and emotional effects?
Have there been any studies? I am sure that there are. I'm not verbose enough or competent
I've
enough to
actually
know
read
exactly
some of
what they
those
are.
studies.
So you can consult with other people in the room. There are.
Yes, and there are emotional problems. There's emotional trauma associated specifically with education in kids who have had preschool learning as opposed to kids who have not.
So there's some experts in the room. Yes?
You can usually follow a money trail. What's the money trail here? Where do they get its benefit from this? What do they do?
Who is the they and who's the
The
benefit?
guys who want, people who want this program. You can follow
Those are great questions. And Senator Dayton alluded to that, in the private-public partnership, and what is the motivation? If you're going to throw good money, which I consider this to be after bad results, what is the motivation? What are we really trying to do? And those are questions that need to be asked, and I think you need to be asking representatives and senators as they look at this bill and voting on it. And I think I have my own opinions. I'm going to reserve them right now, and until I get into the weeds on that just a little bit more. Okay, thank you for coming. Feel free to converse amongst yourselves, and we'll be here for questions as well. Thank you.
we are.